The untouchable millionaire finally gave in. This one night changed everything forever. Before we dive into every detail of this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Subscribe so you never miss a moment, and let's begin this journey together. She knew accepting this job would rewrite her life, but Aubry Lane pushed through those steel doors anyway. The lobby of White Industries felt more like a surgical theater than a corporate headquarters. Everything was chrome and glass, surfaces so pristine they seemed hostile to human fingerprints. Aubry's modest heels made almost no sound against the polished concrete as she approached the security desk, where a man with weary eyes scanned her ID 3 times before finally nodding. 54th floor, he said, handing back her credentials. Mr. White is expecting you. Expecting. The word felt clinical, like she was a prescription being delivered. Aubry had spent the last 5 years building her reputation as a crisis management specialist, the woman corporations called when their public image was hemorrhaging. She'd rehabilitated disgraced politicians, coached awkward tech billionaires through hostile interviews, and once convinced the world that a pharmaceutical CEO actually cared about patients. But she'd never been hired to be a human barrier before. The elevator ascended in near silence, only the faint hum of machinery accompanying her racing thoughts. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Maya? Another emotionally unavailable rich guy who thinks money solves everything? Aubry didn't respond. If only it were that straightforward. The 54th floor reception area looked like it had been designed by someone who believed in geometry over humanity. Everything formed perfect right angles. The furniture, the abstract sculptures, even the receptionist's desk. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling below, but somehow the view felt distant, untouchable. And then she saw him. Adam White stood facing those windows, hands clasped behind his back with military precision. He was taller than the magazine profile suggested, his frame lean but solid beneath a slate-gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His light brown hair was immaculately styled, and even from behind, she could sense the tension radiating from his shoulders like a physical force. Mr. White. Her voice carried the exact balance of confidence and professionalism she'd perfected over years of high-stakes meetings. He turned slowly, and Aubry felt something shift in her chest. The photographs in Business Insider and Forbes hadn't captured the piercing quality of his blue-gray eyes, or the thin scar that traced along his left forearm, visible just past his cuff. But more than that, they hadn't captured the profound loneliness etched into his features, something that made her lungs tighten with unexpected recognition. Ms. Lane. His voice was measured, controlled, like every word had been weighed before being released. Thank you for coming on such short notice. She noticed immediately that he didn't extend his hand. Instead, he gestured toward a conference room with a careful, economical movement that maintained at least 5 feet between them. Shall we review the parameters? Parameters. Not terms. Not expectations. Parameters, like she was a scientific variable to be controlled. The next 30 minutes felt less like a job interview and more like drafting a treaty between 2 nations. Adam's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Gerald, laid out the contract with mathematical precision. 6 months. 16 high-profile events. Your role is to manage Mr. White's public interactions, shield him from unwanted physical contact, and maintain the appearance that White Industries is led by an accessible, engaged CEO. Gerald slid a document across the glass table. The compensation figure made Aubry's eyes widen slightly before she caught herself. But then her gaze landed on a specific clause, highlighted in yellow. The contractor shall maintain a minimum 3-foot perimeter around Mr. White at all times unless photographic evidence of proximity is required for public relations purposes. Under no circumstances shall the contractor initiate physical contact without explicit verbal consent. Aubry looked up at Adam, who sat with his hands folded on the table, not quite meeting her eyes. 3 feet, she said quietly. That's very specific. Most of her clients craved the illusion of normalcy, wanted someone who could make them look relatable, warm, human. But Adam White was codifying his isolation into a legal document before they'd even had a real conversation. May I ask why? The question emerged softer than she intended, more personal than professional. For a heartbeat, something flickered across Adam's face. Vulnerability, shame, maybe even fear. But it vanished behind his carefully constructed composure so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. I prefer clearly defined boundaries, he said, his voice flat. It's more efficient for everyone involved. She'd worked with men who were paranoid about corporate espionage, men who were socially paralyzed by anxiety, men who simply needed someone to make them look less robotic in public. But she'd never encountered someone who seemed fundamentally afraid of human proximity itself. I understand, Aubry said finally, though she didn't. Not really. The contract was executed with expensive fountain pens and witnessed by Gerald, who looked like he performed this exact ritual several times a day. As Aubry prepared to leave, Adam walked her toward the elevator, maintaining that careful 3-foot radius with the precision of someone who'd spent years measuring the distance. The first engagement is Thursday evening, he said. A technology merger dinner at the Pinnacle Club. My driver will collect you at 6:30. Of course. She paused as the elevator doors slid open with a whisper. Mr. White. Yes. For what it's worth, I'm exceptionally good at my job. You won't need to worry about anything. Something in his expression softened, barely perceptible, like ice beginning to thaw in sunlight. I hope that's true, Ms. Lane. His voice dropped slightly. I genuinely hope that's true. As the elevator descended, Aubry found herself replaying the moment he'd turned from those windows. The way he held himself so perfectly still, as if movement itself carried risk. The scar on his arm that spoke of some past trauma. The carefully modulated way he spoke, as though emotion was something to be managed rather than expressed. The fact that he'd hired someone specifically to keep the world at arm's length. She pulled out her phone and archived Maya's text without answering. Some situations were too layered to explain in a message. The city blurred past the taxi window as she headed back to her apartment in Queens, but her mind kept circling back to those blue-gray eyes and the weight they seemed to carry. Not the weight of wealth or responsibility, but something far more personal. Something broken. She'd been hired to be a buffer, nothing more. A professional obstacle between a damaged man and a world that wanted too much from him. But something whispered to her that Adam White needed more than just someone to manage the 3-foot radius around his life. He needed someone who could see past the walls he'd constructed, brick by careful brick, around whatever had shattered him. And despite every instinct telling her to maintain emotional distance, Aubry found herself wondering what catastrophe had made a man so terrified of human touch. For days later, she would discover that some wounds never stopped bleeding. What do you think happened to Adam that made him so afraid of physical contact? Have you ever known someone who seemed to have everything on the outside but was clearly shattered on the inside? The Blacktown car arrived at exactly 6:30 p.m., as Adam had promised. Aubry smoothed the fabric of her emerald cocktail dress one final time before stepping out of her building into the cool evening air. The dress struck the perfect balance, sophisticated enough for a corporate dinner, but not so formal that she'd appear disconnected from reality. She'd learned that calibration was everything in this line of work. The driver, a silver-haired man with gentle eyes, held the door open with practiced grace. Ms. Lane, I'm Edward. Mr. White asked me to ensure your comfort this evening. As they pulled into Manhattan traffic, Aubry noticed the privacy partition was already raised. Even in his own vehicle, Adam preferred compartmentalization, barriers between himself and other humans. The Pinnacle Club occupied the top 3 floors of the Apex Tower, the kind of establishment where venture capitalists and board members negotiated billion-dollar deals over $400 bottles of wine. Aubry had attended similar venues, but tonight felt weighted with something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way her pulse quickened as they pulled up to the tower, or the fact that she'd checked her reflection 4 times before leaving her apartment. She spotted Adam immediately in the building's soaring lobby. He stood near the architectural fountain, examining his phone with the intense focus of someone actively avoiding eye contact with the world. His black tuxedo was flawless, but she registered the way he kept his shoulders angled toward the wall, the way his free hand stayed in his pocket, creating a physical barrier even in open space. Mr. White. Her heels clicked against marble as she approached, announcing her presence before she got too close. He looked up, and for just a fraction of a second, she caught something unguarded in his expression, relief, perhaps even appreciation, before his features reset to their default neutrality. Aubry. Her name sounded different tonight in his voice. Less clinical. You look professional. She almost laughed. Most men would have said beautiful, or elegant, or at least appropriate. But Adam White said professional as if compliments were a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Thank you, she replied, letting amusement color her tone. You're rather presentable yourself. They walked toward the elevator bank, and she observed how he calibrated that 3-foot distance with unconscious precision, close enough to appear together, far enough to avoid accidental contact. Around them, other couples brushed shoulders naturally, shared casual touches, expressed intimacy without thinking. But Adam moved like he was surrounded by an invisible electric fence. The elevator was crowded with other guests heading to the same event. A woman wearing sapphires stepped backward without looking, her shoulder grazing Adam's arm. Aubry watched his entire body lock up, saw his breathing become shallow and controlled, saw the color drain slightly from his face. But he said nothing, just shifted forward subtly, creating more space between himself and everyone else in that confined box. You all right? Aubry whispered, low enough that only he could hear. He nodded once, sharp and controlled. Fine. But she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. The Pinnacle Club's main room was a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers, hushed conversations, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city's glittering skyline. Technology executives mingled with investment bankers, their companions dressed in designer gowns that cost more than most people earned in 3 months. Aubry had navigated dozens of these events, but tonight she felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture where she didn't quite know the rules. Adam. A booming voice shattered the ambient murmur. A man in his late 50s approached with arms spread wide, clearly intending to pull Adam into one of those aggressive bear hugs that some men mistake for warmth. Aubry watched Adam's face go ashen. Without thinking, she stepped forward smoothly, intercepting the approaching man with her hand extended and a radiant smile. You must be Mr. Castellano, she said warmly. I'm Aubry Lane, Adam's strategic partner. I've read so much about your work in biotech integration. Castellano, clearly charmed by her directness, clasped her hand instead of continuing his trajectory toward Adam. Well, aren't you a breath of fresh air? And please, call me Victor. Behind her, she heard Adam's quiet exhale, barely audible, but unmistakable. For the next 90 minutes, she became his shield,